Two of the most famous trad wives on the internet have strong connections to the Mormon Church. First, we have Ballerina Farm. Her account is run by a woman named Hannah Nealman, and she's married into what many refer to as Mormon royalty. She has 8 kids, though Reddit thinks she may be pregnant with her 9th, and she's amassed over 23 million followers across all of her platforms. The New York Times called her a cultural lightning rod. We also have Nara Smith, and while she's not confirmed to be a member herself, she did marry a famous Mormon model named Lucky Blue Smith. She has 4 children at the age of 24, and she has 17 million followers across platforms. If you've spent any time at all on Instagram Reels or on TikTok, you've probably come across these women at some point on your screen, and I'll say more generally, the trad wife movement has sparked internet controversy for years at this point. There are so many layers as to why people feel so strongly about women baking and cooking for content, on top of having children and making meals for their husbands. And some people say that anyone who criticizes this form of content is merely jealous or projecting. Other people accuse trad wives of cosplaying traditional femininity, since when you have a social media empire, that's actually a business. And running a successful business seems to be the opposite of what many people refer to when they say traditional womanhood. Another common criticism is that these accounts are more or less brainwashing young women into giving up feminism and to submitting to the patriarchy, and that this content is basically a form of religious and conservative propaganda that's meant to convince women that the only way they'll be happy is to be pregnant and in a kitchen. Some say this content is especially misleading because it neglects to inform the young people watching it the potential risks of choosing this type of lifestyle, which is how we get articles like this, which say how obeying LDS church teachings can leave some women in poverty. I'll also note that a lot of people say it's just not that deep. It's just a video of a woman making sourdough bread. And I'm gonna weigh in on all of these controversies within this video and give my hot takes about trad wives. I'll also share a deep dive into Hannah Nealman, aka Ballerina Farm. I began this outline planning on talking about both Nara Smith and Ballerina Farm, but my outline got so long just doing a deep dive into Hannah that I decided to just zero in on her Mormon story and what it tells us about the broader culture and doctrine of the church. That being said, let me know in the comments if you would like a Nara Smith deep dive, because even though these women often get lumped together and they do have a lot of similarities, there are also some very stark differences between these two stories, which I could jump more into in a follow-up video if you all are interested. I also want to add here at the front that Hannah has gone on record to say that she doesn't identify with the term trad wife. Rather, this is a label given to her by others and by the internet. Honestly, this is probably one of my most requested videos of all time and something I get asked about a lot in comments, and so if you've been waiting for it, here it is. If this is your first time here on my channel, hi, my name is Alyssa Grenfell. I was a devout Mormon for about 2 decades before I left the church at 23. I was married in a Mormon temple, I served a Mormon mission, I went to Brigham Young University, and now I make content about the Mormon church from an ex-Mormon perspective. Don't forget to brew up a mug of devil's bean juice, and let's get into it. Now, just as a very brief explanation, trad wife is short for traditional wife, and there are a lot of definitions floating around online, so I'll just give you mine. I also made this video a while back. This is a deep dive into my own trad wife training I received as a young Mormon girl. It goes into personal progress, which was basically like a trad wife model for how to become a better homemaker, a better wife, and a better mother. I'll link that below if you want to check that out. For me, a trad wife is someone who embraces very strict and traditional gender norms within parenting and within the home. It's also about not just how she views her responsibility to care for her children, but there's an added responsibility of caring for her husband as well. A trad wife, if you notice wife within that word, is more defined by her relationship to her husband than she is by her relationship to her children. For me, that's why being beautiful is a major aspect of being a trad wife, because it's about more than just caring for your children. It's about looking hot for your husband and making him tasty food and seeing your responsibility. I think that's why when you look at pictures of trad wives online, often it's the wife in relationship to the husband, and not just simply pictures of women caring for children. Trad wives are also often very religiously coded, and so submission to one's husband is seen as a sign that you have faith in God, and that you have faith in the roles that God has made for women and men, which within most religion, especially Christianity, those two roles are distinctly different. And that's why I think trad wives and Mormonism and Mormon doctrine really go together like peanut butter and jelly. It's why I think using Mormon doctrine to understand Hannah Nealman's life is so vitally important, and you really can't divorce the two. It's not like these two things exist in different paradigms. I think the reason Hannah makes the choices she has in her life is largely in part due to her devout belief in her religion. Here's a document I've shown many times. This is the Family Proclamation to the World, and it's basically on the wall of any devout Mormon home I've ever been in. And it says very specifically, by divine design, so God appointed, this is God's rules over here, fathers are to preside over their families in love and righteousness, and are responsible to provide the necessities of life and protection for their families. Mothers, women, are primarily responsible for the nurture of their children. This document, the Family Proclamation to the World, is one that I read constantly growing up. I mentioned Personal Progress earlier, the little trad wife training book, and within that book you are asked to go and read this over and over and over again and really internalize it. And because Hannah Nealman is basically the same age as me, we both grew up reading the Family Proclamation, doing Personal Progress, and we were raised on the same expectation that for women specifically, the primary role in this world is wife and mother. And as I cover the story of Hannah Nealman, especially how she more or less gave up her career in ballet in order to start a farm with her husband, which was her husband's dream. We're going to get into all of that, but I think understanding that she was raised with this idea that wife and mother are her core and primary roles, and that she fully has faith in that and believes in that as a religious principle, is going to help the audience, or like people who are trying to make sense of her, understand why she's made the decisions that she has in this life. Now, before we continue, I'm proud to announce that this week's video sponsor is the American Humanist Association. For over 80 years, the AHA has promoted a vision of ethical living and personal fulfillment without needing a belief in God. As part of their new American Empathy Project, the AHA is giving away over $100,000 in grants to fund service projects across the country. If you have a service project that needs funding, consider applying for a grant at humanist.org/Grenfell. Applications close on March 13th. Even if you don't have a service project in mind, the team at AHA has created project guides to inspire and guide you. I've joined the AHA because the work they're doing to advocate for the separation of church and state is so important to me. If you are in a position to support their work, you can head over to humanist.org/Grenfell to become a sustaining member. While you're there, check out their merch store. You can even get 20% off this I Gave Up Eternal Life for Coffee shirt that the AHA made just for my viewers. They also have tote bags, mugs, stickers, and apparel that will make you the envy of all your godless friends. Now, I think the difference between a trad wife and a stay-at-home mom is that a stay-at-home mom is more defined by her relationship to care for her kids, instead of viewing herself as caring for her husband as well. I have 2 kids, and I, at certain points in my life, have been a stay-at-home mom, especially when my children were newborn babies, and I'll say that my husband was fully in the trenches with me, changing diapers and getting up late at night. I was not wearing makeup throughout that time, but rather had my hair up in a messy bun and had sweats on. For me, a stay-at-home mom is more defined by the seasons of one's life and the early years of childhood, and less defined by ideology. I do think that in a Venn diagram, these two roles of trad wife and stay-at-home mom do have a lot of overlap, but there's also elements of them that are distinctly different. Now I want to dive into a Mormon/ex-Mormon analysis of Hannah Nealman, aka Ballerina Farm. And I'll say that I think, just like with my Outdoor Boys video, video where I talked about how he recently joined Mormon church leadership, I think that there is obviously the person themselves and their own Mormon story, but there's also what this person in their life tells us about Mormon doctrine and culture. And I think in many ways that is the more interesting part to me, that it's not just about this person's story specifically, but it's what it reveals about this broader church culture. I also think that with Ballerina Farm specifically, because her audience is so massive, it's also what her content tells us about culture in general. So it's not just about her Mormon story, but it's what her Mormon story and the virality of her content is showing us about the culture we're currently living in. It's basically like this content holds a mirror up to the values of what people are interested in today's society. I do actually distinctly remember the first time I came across a Ballerina Farm video. I think it was one of her classic videos where she's standing in front of her big green oven. She's wearing a prairie dress and homemaking food from scratch. And I remember distinctly feeling like, where am I? Like, it feels like you're almost watching a historical reenactment of some kind, because it feels like you're stepping into a different world to some extent. And I remember clicking through to the video, seeing her feed, picking up that they were in Utah, and then of course taking to Google to ask, is Ballerina Farm Mormon? And of course, the quick answer is yes. A lot of people have compared her content to Little House on the Prairie. I personally grew up reading Little House on the Prairie. I wanted to be just like Laura Ingalls Wilder. I read all the books. We watched the TV show. And so for me, stepping into the world of her content feels not just reminiscent of traditional wives or gender roles, but specifically that it's reminiscent of Mormon pioneer women. Not that Little House on the Prairie is Mormon specifically, but that anyone who grew up Mormon was definitely raised on these romanticized stories of these faithful Mormon pioneers heading west. The movie I think of is Legacy. It's linked on YouTube if you want to check it out. And that form of womanhood is very valorized even today in today's modern world amongst Mormon people. Before we continue, just a quick reminder to like this video, subscribe to my channel. I have a new video about the Mormon Church every single week. I talk about Mormon church doctrine, pop culture, my experience in the church. So don't forget to subscribe if you want to see that. Feel free to drop a comment if you have any Ballerina Farm hot takes. It seems that there is a never-ending discourse around this subject, so I'm sure that even if this video was 500 hours long, I would still not be able to fit everything into this video, so drop a comment if you have any thoughts yourself. I also received a lot of requests to cover the Elizabeth Smart story. There was a Netflix documentary about her just a few weeks ago. I do have a separate Patreon video where I went into her story, some of the Mormon connections, because I felt like the documentary does touch on the Mormon Church and Mormon doctrine, but I feel like there was so much that was popping out at me as I was watching that I feel like really needed to be highlighted. So I went over her story, I reacted to the documentary, and also added my own analysis in this Patreon video. It's already posted if you want to check it out. Hannah Nealman was born as Hannah Wright. She was born in Utah to a large Mormon family of 9 children. Her parents owned a flower shop, and at a very young age, she showed a huge talent for dance. To read from this article, it says, so after a ballet concert when Hannah was young, a friend suggested that she might be good enough to get into the Juilliard School in New York City, considered one of the world's leading dance schools. With some encouragement from her family, Hannah pursued that goal until she was admitted to the prestigious school's summer program when she was 14. And going into this, I mean, even growing up, I heard Juilliard get tossed around. I've always known it's basically the most prestigious school for a lot of different art forms. And so for me, for Hannah to get into Juilliard at 14, I think of it as almost like dance's version of the Olympics. Like, this is proof that she is truly one of the most gifted dancers in the country. Now, I think that even the choice to participate in ballet is ultimately a very Mormon choice. I covered this comparison in this video. There's this New York Times article where they say why so much dance in Utah of all places. This was from, I believe, the 70s. 70s. Dance is seen as a huge cultural flex in the church, especially in Utah. And it's not just any dance. I would say from my research, it's specifically ballet and ballroom dance. And so the fact that Hannah is introduced to dance specifically, even that choice of origin already feels like a pretty Mormon story to me. To continue reading from the article, it says at 16, Hannah earned a scholarship to Brigham Young University. That's the same school I went to. That's the Mormon-owned university. She went to their theater ballet program until she went back to New York and finished her schooling again at Juilliard. I thought it was interesting that she paid for her schooling with beauty pageants. And so one of her more recent, I would say, controversies, or a reason that she was in the news, is here she's being covered by the New York Times because she participated in a beauty pageant 2 weeks after giving birth. I'll explain more about that when we get a little further in her story, but I'll just say that I think it's clear that for most young women, if they got to this point in their career where they are a Juilliard ballerina, for most people, we would see a story where they continue onward, they keep practicing, maybe they get hired by a ballet troupe, they travel the world, they dance on national and global stages. That's probably the most typical story of a Juilliard ballerina. But this is at its heart a Mormon story and not a Juilliard story. And so this is not the case for Hannah. And I'll say too, I'm about to start reading a little bit from this article. This is from the Times coverage of Ballerina Farm. This is yet another instance of a controversy, or a time that people started talking about Ballerina Farm and Hannah a lot, was when this article was published. It was covered by Candace Owens and Brett Cooper and a lot of other conservative internet figures, and I'm going to be quoting pieces of it in this video. Now, at this point, we have Hannah living in New York City, fulfilling her dreams. She's dancing all day. She's ultra talented. And while she's in New York City for school, at some point she travels back to Utah to visit family. Dun, dun, dun. Enter Daniel, her future husband. She met him at what I assume was a BYU basketball game. This is where it gets a bit dark from the outside looking in, and what I'm about to tell you, the story of how their courtship went, reminds me of this TikTok video, which I figured I'd show you just to kick off this part of our conversation.
I met him, and he wouldn't leave my father's store for 3 weeks. He camped outside. He would throw rocks through my window with notes that said, "Please go out with me." Grandma, you little victim. What the fuck?
And honestly, those types of videos are kind of a trend. There's other versions of the same sentiment you can find on TikTok where it's basically like the love story is a woman being so continuously hounded by a man that she finally just gives into him and gives up, even though in a lot of the stories it seems like she was saying no at the beginning. For me, these stories are often told with like a kind of twinkle in the eye, like, oh, look how much he loved her. He wasn't willing to take no for an answer. But from a modern perspective, it honestly doesn't feel like much of a love story at all. So to read from the Times piece, we have Daniel talking here. So this is the husband. He's recounting the story of them getting married. And he says, "I saw her and I was ready to go," he says. "Sign me up. I was thinking, let's get married, but she wouldn't go on a date with me for 6 months. I feel like I need a little red flag. Maybe I'll buy one of those for future videos. It's not that like she wouldn't get married for 6 months because she keeps saying no. Like, it's that it takes essentially 6 months of him wearing her down before it seems like she's even willing to go on a first date. But wait, their first date was not because she finally was like, yeah, I'll give this guy a chance. Their first date is like a little, like in my opinion, a little bit of the horror story within the horror story. It's not even that she's like, yeah, okay, I'll go on a date with you. It's that he basically more or less tricks her into sitting with him on a 5-hour flight. To read from the article, it says, one day she mentioned to Daniel that she was getting the 5-hour flight from Salt Lake City to New York back to Juilliard. I'll note here, and we're going to get into it in a bit, that Daniel is not just some ordinary Mormon boy. He is the heir to a $400 million fortune, and his dad started JetBlue amongst many other airlines. And so Daniel is not just like, BYU boy. He definitely has the ability to pull some strings in this situation. So she's taking the flight back to Juilliard. It says she didn't realize his dad owned the airline. So Daniel was like, I'm on that same flight, she says. I remember checking in and them saying, you're 5A and you're 5B. I just thought, no way, that's crazy. Daniel smiles. I made a call. He had pulled strings at JetBlue, and so began their first date. Now, what I think is interesting to pull out here is that they aren't concealing this story per se, because I think for a lot of people, like in the TikTok video I just showed, a lot of people might be like, that seems like a bit of a potentially malicious way to start a relationship, to kind of trick someone into sitting next to you after they've said they don't want to date you for 6 months. But I think the reason that they are pretty proud of the story and willing to tell the story to the journalist is specifically because they feel it's a super romantic story. For anyone that has a Mormon brain, this is just a pretty typical story of a guy being so interested in a girl that he wouldn't take no for an answer, which for a lot of us is like, not taking no for an answer, what about consent? But for the Mormon brain, it's more like, wow, that's how much he loves her. He's willing to go to the ends of the earth to be a prince and get his princess. And this is actually a romantic story. It's not a story of being trapped on an airline with a guy you don't want to date. I think when a Mormon man is like a go-getter in this way, it's framed as like, it's a sign he really likes you. It's a sign how like he's so romantic. When from the outside looking in, it just looks like the girl is being kind of forced into finally just placating and saying yes, especially when so much of being raised in the church is like, don't be rude to men, say yes to a first date, say yes to a first dance. You know, this is a little handout from a church dance, and it basically says like, if the boy was willing to do the hard thing of asking you to dance, you should do the hard thing. Like the least you can do is dance with him and say yes. And these are like the two sides of the coin. He asked you, and that was his responsibility. And your responsibility is to say yes. Now, to give a little background on Daniel, I thought it was interesting they have the same number of children in the family they grew up with. So Daniel was also one of 9 children, big Mormon family. The difference being he was born into an ultra-wealthy family. So Daniel Nealman's father is David Nealman, who founded 5 airlines. That's a big number of airlines. 5 commercial airlines: Morris Air, WestJet, JetBlue, that's the most famous, Azul Brazilian Airlines, and Breeze Airways. And the internet estimates that Daniel Nealman's net worth is $400 million. Now, I grew up hearing the term Mormon royalty. It basically refers to anyone in the church who has an elevated status, whether it's because of fame or because of money. The Marriotts are an example of Mormon royalty. Obviously, also the Nealmans would be. The Osmonds could be considered Mormon royalty. We can add the Romneys to that list. It's really just anyone who has a high profile and is incredibly influential. And so Hannah Wright essentially was being courted by the son of Mormon royalty. Now, I did some math, and if you were to split that $400 million 9 ways as the inheritance, it means that upon the death of David and his wife, that Daniel and Hannah are set to inherit about $44 million. That's obviously just if you divide, of course, inheritance is probably more complicated than that, but safe to say, they are probably set up to inherit an insane amount of wealth at some point in their lives. And here's a picture of all of them together from when Hannah and Daniel were first married. Now, as I said at the beginning, one of the most common criticisms against Hannah's content is that it seems to not fully divulge the wealth that stands behind them. I think this is where part of the cosplay criticism comes in. Though Hannah said in a recent video they never got any money from Daniel's family. We also have this quote though, which says, Daniel got a job as the director of his father's security company, moving their young family to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where before long she had 3 kids under 4. As much as she says we haven't gotten money directly from Daniel's parents, it does seem at the very least that he is benefiting from their early marriage as being part of the family business. Brazil is also where Daniel served his Mormon mission, and upon reading these two people's stories, Hannah Nealman and Daniel Nealman, it's safe to say that they are some of the most devout members I've seen, especially people who have social media profiles. I think there are a lot of Mormon content creators and influencers, but often they're seen not really wearing their garments or not depicting themselves or showing themselves going to church. Based on their stories coming from huge Mormon families, from everything I read about them, they are basically just about as devout as you can get. When they got married, Hannah was 21 and Daniel was 23. And to quote from the article, it said, "Back then I thought we should date for a year before marriage." She continues, "So I could go to school and whatever." And Daniel was like, "It's not going to work. We've got to get married now." Okay, steamrolled there. After a month, they were engaged. 2 months after that, they were married. From there, the married couple moved to the Upper West Side. It says 3 months after that, she was pregnant. So 3 months after getting married, pregnant, the first Juilliard undergraduate to be expecting in modern history. And I did find this video. This is from her Instagram. She posted a video of her at Juilliard dancing, doing ballet, while she's 8 months pregnant. Now, obviously, a very fast marriage is super common, very normalized in the church. It's not a huge surprise they got married this fast. As she notes, she's like, "Oh, I think maybe we should date for at least a year," which for now, to modern standards, even that is super fast. From the day I met my husband to the day we got married was 10 months, so even we did not match this expectation of a year. And honestly, I think these two stories, the story of him dating her even though she was saying no, dating, entrapping her on the plane, and then him steamrolling her over when to get married, it really sets the stage for what the rest of their relationship seems to look like. This is why I think, even though Hannah says she's not a trad wife, many people call her one, because we see in their relationship story not just her sacrificing for her children, but specifically submitting to her boyfriend or husband's wishes for her life. So it's not just that she's having babies or being a stay-at-home mom to raise them, it's that even before children enter the picture, she is still submitting to the man's will. Hannah and Daniel also got married in the temple. I'll also say that my brain keeps confusing David and Daniel because those are so similar to me, so I'm sorry if I misspeak at some point. It's not my fault, they all sound the same. When Hannah and Daniel got married, they got married in a temple. As I've said in other videos, this is another marker of a devout Mormon couple. To get married in the temple and to serve a mission, you have to complete the temple endowment. This is the ultra secret ceremony where they do the special handshakes and the chanting in the circle. This is also where you get your Mormon underwear. You can often see in Hannah's outfits that she's wearing garments. This is pretty common because garments just don't fit women's bodies very well, especially historically. And so when I used to wear the religious underwear, I can find pictures of myself where it's like kind of poking out of your collar, it's poking out of your sleeves. Maybe if you're wearing a skirt, it's showing from underneath your skirt. That's why one of the reasons women don't really like garments is because it can be so difficult to wear fashionable clothing while also wearing your temple garments. This is why I consider her to be one of the more devout Mormon influencers, though, is that she does usually seem to be wearing the garments where so many other women choose to not wear them. Another reason I mentioned the temple is this is also the point at which she would covenant with God to obey her husband. I'll put the actual words off to the side here. The ceremony has changed a bit over time, but back when Hannah Nealman was doing her endowment ceremony, this is one of the laws that she would have covenanted to obey. And it says, this is specifically to women, it says, "You and each of you solemnly covenant and promise before God, angel, and these witnesses at this altar that you will observe and keep the law of your husband and abide by his counsel in righteousness. Each of you bow your head and say yes." So when I went through the temple, I also covenanted to obey my husband. And so that's why I say that her story needs to be examined through the lens of Mormonism, because she's obviously raised with the family proclamation to the world, which says that a woman is responsible for the care and nurture care of her children. She grows up doing things like personal progress, which also talk about the role of being a wife and a mother, of learning homemaking skills. And then she enters the temple, which continues to reinforce this idea that the man is the head of the household, that a woman is meant to be submissive to him and obey him. At this point within the temple, when women were asked to submit to their husbands, the husband never did the same to the wife. So there's never a moment in the ceremony where the men stand up and they say, "You now covenant to obey the law of your wife." No. Within this religion, the man is also the patriarch of the family. So he holds the priesthood, which is the literal power of God. He can give priesthood blessings. He can baptize the children. He can pass the sacrament. He can bless the sacrament. He could be prophet someday. All of these things are off limits to women because women are not permitted to have the power of God or the priesthood by virtue of simply the fact of being a woman. When so much of the ideology of your life has been stacked up to be about how men make decisions and women follow decisions, it's not surprising to me that Hannah obeys her priesthood leader so often. And I'm going to read in a bit from Hannah's blog. This is a blog that she had early in her marriage. And I think it reveals the extent to which, especially in those early years, she's struggling with her identity of being a wife and mother, and being a wife and mother instead of being a Juilliard ballerina in New York City. Now, at this point, I'd like to address this idea that it is anti-feminist to criticize another woman's choices. Now, for me, this still feels like sexism in disguise, because this idea that we should never criticize any choice a woman makes purely because she's a woman is still just another version of putting women on a pedestal. It means that we can't humanize them. They can't be imperfect people who make good choices and bad choices. It means that we are once again reverting to this whore and Madonna complex where women should be beyond reproach, put on a pedestal, and that every choice a woman ever makes is a good choice purely because she's a woman. I'll also say that the only people I ever really see levying this criticism are traditional conservatives. And these are the people who don't even like feminism. But it's like they'll use it for this one time to throw it back in our faces, to say, well, here's proof that you don't actually care about women, because how is it feminist to tear a woman down? My answer to that is that I don't think feminism has ever been about supporting women literally no matter what they do. One of the biggest groups of people who were against women getting the right to vote were women. That certainly doesn't mean I'm okay with not having the right to vote. It just means that women are also imperfect people. And the most humanizing thing we can do is engaging with these ideas head on, rather than saying, we simply can't talk about it because it's a woman. In my opinion, why would we not want to dissect and discuss one of the biggest examples of traditional femininity on the internet? This isn't the same as trashing her. It's merely saying, wow, this cultural shift seems to be indicative of a larger trend, and we want to dissect what's at the heart of this to understand what's happening all around us. I think for a lot of women, when it comes to consuming tradwife content, it does feel like it's showing a very one-dimensional side of what marriage really is. Because marriage isn't just about being lovey-dovey. It is still a legal contract. And I referenced this article earlier. I'll put a few others to the side here. But it's clear that for women, when women leave marriage, they are statistically much more likely to experience poverty than the men. I personally knew many Mormon women who dropped out of college to get married and to have children. And I mean, obviously it's their choice, but it does feel like it's important to educate women to let them know that, hey, if this relationship doesn't work out, what are you going to do for money? You don't have a degree. You don't have work experience. How are you going to protect yourself and even your children financially if your husband cheats on you? Or even if you're just unhappy and want to leave the relationship because simply you're not happy. Here's another video that went viral recently of a stay-at-home mom who her husband said, I want a divorce. She doesn't even have her own credit card. And that's why for me, it is that deep. It's not just a video of a woman making sourdough bread, because you know, I'm sure for women who are in their 9-to-5 jobs who are watching this content, there obviously, even within the comments, are people saying, wow, I wish I could just stay at home and love on my babies. But it is a little bit of all that glitters is not gold, because there are risks to choosing that lifestyle. I also feel like, along with this element of, oh, I wish we could return to traditional values, we need to make America great again, obviously. Within all of this conservative rhetoric around how women should be, I think for a lot of women who look back even a few decades of our history, it's very clear women had significantly less autonomy if you go back to the 1950s housewife. It wasn't even until 1974 that women were allowed to open their own bank accounts without having a male cosigner, so without having a father or a spouse to cosign on the bank account. And as a reminder, if someone's cosigned on your bank account, it means they can take the money out. It means you don't have private access to your money. And so for me, that 1974 number, it means everything before that was women did not have true financial security. And that's really just one example. We also have that women didn't have access to birth control until the 1960s. That's when it was invented. And so it was very difficult for you to control your own bodily autonomy, because if your husband had sex with you, there were very few ways to prevent pregnancy. What I find even more disturbing about this fact is that it wasn't even until 1970s that marital rape was outlawed. So what this means is that before the 1970s, if your husband wanted to have sex with you and you said, no, I don't want to do that, and then he did anyways, what that means is that that wasn't against the law. There was no way you could take that to the courts and say, my husband is raping me. That didn't exist according to the law. That wasn't actually possible. And so with those two things together, no access to birth control and no such thing legally as marital rape, that is a recipe for women truly not having any control over their own body. What's more is that during this time, you could also get fired for being pregnant. And so even if you're trying to be financially independent and you're pregnant, and you don't have access to birth control, suddenly you're fired. It wasn't until the 1980s that they got rid of the fact that you could fire women just for being pregnant. And I was born in 1992. And so for me, reading up on history, all of this feels really recent. I'm 33, so I may be a little old, but I'm not that old. And the fact that women were just getting rights, just getting access to bank accounts and to birth control and to workplace protections, not even just like 50 years ago, that these things are just now coming online, it does feel very scary when people are embracing this idea that we need to return to the way things used to be. It seems like people often say like, well, people used to respect the sanctity of marriage. People just didn't get divorced so much back then. That was a better time. Neglecting to realize that a major reason women didn't get divorced is that they had no way of having a bank account or having their own money or having financial security. And they were incredibly dependent on their husband, even if the husband was abusive. And there are multiple times in the history of this country that the Mormon Church actively opposed this type of legislation. One of the most recent is the Equal Rights Amendment, which the church actively campaigned against and said, we don't want legal equity for women. We don't want this law to get passed. So for me, when people are fantasizing about 50s housewives, it doesn't look so sparkly to me personally. I will keep my birth control access and my bank account access. Thank you very much. And I say all of that as a happily married woman with 2 kids. I think all of these historical data points are a major reason why alarm bells go off for so many women when they come across this tradwife fantasy, especially because I think a lot of the youngest people, like people who are on TikTok, that's a very young crowd. And so it can feel like, hey, I don't know if they realize just how recently we all were able to get access to these rights. I think it's about a lot more than jealousy, which is why when people are like, you're just jealous, I'm like, okay, believe whatever you want, but it's about a lot more than that. I think this is especially the case because if you follow the news, a few years ago, obviously Roe versus Wade was overturned, and the battle for abortion rights is a huge question state to state to state, and I live in Texas, which is one of the worst states for access to abortion. And so it's not just history, it's not just things that happened in the past, it's an ongoing battle that women face to assert their right over their own bodies. And so I'm about to read a bit from the Ballerina Farm blog. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten the topic of the video. But I think that's why I get a bit grumpy when I see the tradwife style influencers in interviews talking about how they just want to live their life authentically, they support other women, they're just living their lives. Because ultimately, the name for this career choice is influencer. It's not actually just that you're simply living your life, even though I'm sure it does feel that way. Because the reason why we call these people influencers is because ultimately other people are looking at them to make sense of the world, to know what passions to pursue, to know what dreams to have. And so it's about more than just like, I'm just showing my life online, because I do think it disregards the level to which these videos have influence and sway over the people who consume them. Now, to get back to Hannah, I'm gonna be reading from her blog. This is from before she was famous on Instagram. From what I can tell, this was probably mostly just like a personal journal. She wasn't ultra famous at this point. It covers from 2013 through 2019. I'll link the blog below, but I think the first thing that stood out to me is that her blog is so much more Mormon than her current public-facing image. Now, like, I feel like if you go and scroll through the last 20 posts she's made, other than her talking about being in Utah, I don't know that you could immediately pick up on the signs. Maybe you could. It's like you maybe see she's wearing garments, you see they're in Utah, you see them going to church. It's definitely kind of subliminally there. But within this blog, they have pictures of them in front of the temple. She's talking about her favorite General Conference talk. She talked about reading the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants. And it's just the way in which she is presenting the church as being part of her life is so significantly higher than anything she's posting currently on social media. In my opinion, this is the most distilled version of seeing Hannah as she really is. It's basically her personal private journal prior to getting famous, and it's just still on the internet for us to go and check out. So it reminded me of this article I found as I was researching her. The title is "Why You'll Never Really Know Ballerina Farm." And obviously that's the case because she's a real human being, not just somebody on the internet. But I feel like if we're gonna ever get a glimpse into who she really is, it's probably through this blog. I would say that her blog feels like her diary and her Instagram now feels like a brand. I made a list of some of the most Mormon elements of the blog, but for just the most easy and quick to understand point to make that the blog is very religiously coded is that in the banner it says beliefs. And when I clicked through to it, I was expecting to see basically a little blog post about what she believes, but instead it just goes straight to the church's website. I mean, that's one example of something that she's putting front and center as important to her as the banner of her blog website. I did go click around the current Ballerina Farm website, and I couldn't find any mention of the church anywhere. Like I said, it does talk about Utah. She tells their personal story, but with a lot of the religious elements removed. She doesn't say something like, we were married in the temple, blah, 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 blah. If we compare even just her old website with her new website, there's no beliefs section as you might expect there to be, because that was how she had structured her old website. Now, I thought I'd start by reading her first ever entry. This is from January 15th, 2013, so over 10 years ago. And just to catch you up, at this point she's married, she's no longer living in New York, her baby is already born, and she's teaching dance part-time at a university in Utah. In this entry, she says two people, one was a past pageant coach and another was a fellow dancer I had once danced with. These two people asked her if I was, quote, really happy to have given up those dreams for where I am today. Ha! I am so happy. I am so at peace. I have a husband who is mine forever. Together we have a beautiful baby boy who is full of purity and joy. I get to spend my days with someone who is perfect. It can't really get much better than that. And so here, based on this entry, it seems like even in her life then, people were saying like, are you really happy? You know, to me, when I think of her leaving Juilliard, it's almost like if Simone Biles, who's one of my favorite athletes, it's like if she quit her career when she was just beginning it. Maybe she never even really made it to the Olympics. And now she does like yoga class once a month as part of like some personal time. It's like if Michael Phelps, rather than going to the Olympics, now just like was swimming at the YMCA just to get in a little stretch before going to work. And I think that's almost like the nugget of what seems to be the subtext of these women's questions, because the two people who are asking her this are like a pageant coach, a fellow dancer. They're people who recognize how talented she was, and they're like, are you really happy? And I think it just shows the level to which people even in her life at that point were kind of like scratching their heads like, wow, you really gave up a lot. I'm just curious how this is all playing out in your psyche. I think it's funny she says, ha, like almost like she's like, what a joke. Why, like almost like, who would even think I am not happy? Obviously I am. Now, like I said, that post was from January 15th. We get another post from January 18th. So just a few days later. And in my opinion, she sounds less convinced than she did just a few days before. She says, I've been thinking a lot about work and what that word means to me. The talk by Elder Christofferson, like I said, very religious. She has her religion way more front and center in this. Elder Christofferson is one of the 12 apostles. General Conference is this big Mormon meeting. She says that the talk that keeps coming to mind is where he stated that all work is divine. I like that. I especially like it on days like today, too. I remember when he gave that talk, I was single and in my junior year of college. It really applied to me at that point in my life because school was hard. I would go to ballet class every day and essentially work on the same things day after day. It gave me purpose in schoolwork and dance because that was just it. I was working. She goes on to say, and now that I am a mother, that phrase has a whole new light. It takes work to be a mother, to be a wife, and to care for our little house. But as I thought about that phrase, all work is divine, as I was doing dishes this morning, it gave me peace. So what I think is interesting, and if you haven't seen, I have another video where I read my journals from when I was Mormon. And of course, we're going to have to read between the lines here. But I sense, we have this comparison, right? She's comparing the work she used to do, which is to be a ballerina, with the work she's doing now, which is to washing dishes. And she's affirming to herself that all work is divine, all work is important, and that God sees all the work that she's doing. She said that phrase, all work is divine, gave her peace as she was washing the dishes. It gave me hope. And it gave me joy right then. Sometimes we need to reinvent ourselves. Sometimes I just need to step back and think about why I am doing the things I am doing. There is purpose in building a home, a family, and a marriage. There is joy, there is laughter. And so like I said, this is me reading between the lines a little bit. This is me interpreting. But if I had to guess, it seems like she's having kind of a hard time accepting this new responsibility and reality that she's finding herself in. She has to assert to herself, there's purpose in being a wife and a mother. This is my divine calling. This is something that is good and worthy and I should be happy about. It seems like she's like in real time asserting to herself that she should be happy about washing dishes, just like she was happy about dancing ballet for Juilliard. It's interesting she notes that it takes work to be a mother and to be a wife. In my opinion, she is reframing her grief in real time. She has this grief of a lost identity. And she's like, sometimes we just need to reinvent ourselves. And all work is divine. And I feel like she is self-censoring any amount of sadness that she may perceive she's feeling about this massive change that has happened in her life. In another entry, she's talking about Provo, Utah, which is where Brigham Young University is. That's where I spent about 4 years. And she says, I have been so mean to this little city, always talking about how much I miss New York City, how much better New York City is than quaint little P-Town. P-Town is the nickname for Provo. And honestly, Provo probably feels pretty bad. So today I decided that all needed to change. And then she kind of is going on like a journey and walking around Provo. But that's another moment where you can, like, that's probably the most obvious moment where she's in real time mourning the life she had and struggling to accept this new life and these new roles and responsibilities. But she is feeling guilty that she doesn't like it. And I talked about this experience too when I did my temple endowment, which I did not feel the spirit during the strange cultish ceremony. I did not want to wear garments. They made me feel frumpy. I didn't want to be constantly reminded of this culty ceremony either. But I felt bad for feeling that way. I felt like if I just had more faith, I would love this. I would love the temple. If I just had more faith in God, it would have been a positive and wonderful spiritual experience. If I could just mute the part of my brain telling me I don't like this. And I sense that in her too, as I'm reading through these entries, that she's actively muting the part of her brain that's saying, I miss the old life. I miss my passions. I mean, at Juilliard, she's dancing 6 to 7 hours a day, 6 days a week, from what I could tell online about their dance schedule. And suddenly now she's washing dishes. She used to be walking in the halls of the most prestigious school for dance in the country, in one of the most exciting cities in the country. And now she's a wife in Provo, Utah. And I think, like I said, that article, like Why You'll Never Really Know Ballerina Farm, I feel like this probably is the closest we'll get to an honest view of how she was feeling during that time, which seems to be quite a struggle between what she was doing, what she was very happy to do, to now like gritting her teeth and accepting and trying to, with all of her might, to love the new life as much as she probably pretty easily loved the old life. And I will say that dance is still an echo, like I would call it an echo in her content. Obviously, Ballerina Farm is named in homage to the fact that she is and was a ballerina dancer. But as I scrolled through the moments in which she is talking about dance, it does feel like an echo of an afterthought. And I feel like that's a part that the internet has picked up on a lot, that in that this article from the Times, she like kind of wistfully says, I was a good ballerina dancer, I was a good dancer. And we often see her dancing at the farm, or dancing while holding a baby on her hip, or sneaking away to dance in the morning before the kids wake up. I think for Hannah, this impossibly brilliant talent basically becomes a pastime or a hobby or a party trick to do a few spins in the kitchen while she's watching the kids. For example, I took this screenshot. This is from 2017. She seems to be in a dance studio of some kind, and the caption at the end says, "Me time, baby." And for me, the idea that a Juilliard ballerina is now squeezing in a little ballet time occasionally, and her biggest passion and talent has now become me time. It's very telling. I wonder if she asks herself, or if she thinks about the fact that if Daniel had the same talent, say that he was an amazing ballroom dancer, I wonder if she thinks about the fact that she would have supported his career and he would be dancing professionally. Like, to me, that is like objectively true. If he was the one with the talent and she was in the supporting role, his career would have been followed. Here's another one. It says, today before the sun and babies were awake. So she's squeezing the time in. She's like, all right, when can I fit in a little me time to do this thing that I love? Here's another one. Here she seems to be saying that her tripod made it so that she was dancing a little bit out of frame. And she says, you think this mother of 4 under 5 years old has the time and energy for retakes? You know, in most of the pictures, like in the pictures of Daniel standing with his pigs, she's documenting his journey. Whereas when she needs her own talents documented, it seems like much of the time she was just relying on a tripod. And so for me, as I read through the blog and also went through her old Instagram posts, it does read as his goal and his dream, which is owning the farm, which I'm going to explain more about in a bit, how they got to the farm part, that took precedence over her dream as a ballerina. Another interesting element of this early blog is it does show some of the wealth of the Nealman family. This is one of the posts. It says, every year the Nealman family takes a Christmas trip with all 9 kids and their spouses and grandkids. It's quite the trip. And they go to the Dominican Republic, and it seems like that Nealman family flies out all of that huge troop of kids. I don't know the exact cost, but the idea of flying out 9 kids plus the 2 parents plus all of their grandkids, that has to be prohibitively expensive, along with renting a lodging that's big enough to accommodate all of them. And she says that they do that every Christmas. So if I'm interpreting that, it does seem that she has married into a family that has a tremendous amount of wealth. And we obviously also just know that's the case because of the JetBlue situation. But I think that it seems like she's at least showing more of that side of her new life, more so than in her current content. I made a list of all of the Mormon moments, and honestly, I just stopped writing them down because there's just so many. If you want to go check it out yourself, like I said, I'll link it below. For example, I already said she talks about the general conference talks and the religious videos she's watching and reading. They have family photos of going in front of the temple. That's really common. If there's a new temple opening, people will go do a tour or take a look at it, get pictures in front of it. They have them doing their calling or their church responsibility, which was to be the congregation librarians. They have pictures of cleaning the church building. At one point, she says that her brother, Hannah's brother, is on a mission. They go to BYU athletic games. They have Fast Sunday. She talks about the baby blessing. She talks about reading the scriptures with the kids, specifically the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants. She talks about her Relief Society president and how they gave a speech in church or a talk on the topic of cheerfulness. That's like a quick list of things that I wrote down, but it's really every post. There's so many elements that are just showing she's a very devout member of the church, but also just very culturally Mormon. I think another interesting part of the blog is that she did include a lot of pictures, and she's just wearing basically pretty normal Provo girl outfits. We're not seeing the current fashion that she has on her Instagram coming through with the prairie dresses and the milkmaid dresses and things like that. She's just wearing like t-shirts and jeans, and it is interesting to just see just how young she looks. Her entire aura, I feel like, has transformed from what's on the blog to what's on Instagram. I do think to some extent this adds to the cosplay criticism because it doesn't, like, she doesn't, I mean, I grew up in Kentucky, I lived in Texas, I interacted with a lot of 4-H kids. The 4-H kids are usually the ones who come from farming families. They show up with dirty jeans, they have work boots, they participate in 4-H, they raise cows. Those elements are obviously not present in her early marriage, probably specifically because they didn't have land. They were in what looks like BYU housing to some extent. And so that's, I think, another reason why people feel like there's this shift in her public persona. And usually farmers don't have a public persona. They just exist and they farm, and they don't need to buy all this farm clothing or like traditional wares. They just simply have it because that's their lifestyle. And so I get why people say it looks like billionaires cosplaying farmers, because we have all of this historical evidence of them living a certain lifestyle. And then we have this very branded Instagram, which feels disparate from the origins of the family. I think another thing that comes through, and I think this ties back to the trad wife definition I said, where it's like, a woman's role is not just childcare, but also caring for her husband, doing his laundry, cleaning up after him, making food for him. I think that to some extent, another thing that's revealed within the blog is how much she's engaging in caring for Daniel, the husband, and not just caring for the children. So she talks about making him lunch, making him breakfast, staying up late to make him dinner, all sorts of tasks that I think it's reasonable to assume that he probably could do for himself or with her, but she seems to be taking on this role of traditional wife, of being his supporting figure as he's doing his job or going to classes. And I think a huge amount of the controversy that comes Hannah's way is over the relationship between Hannah and Daniel, whether it's how she cares for him or how she shows up for him, but also I think even more how he shows up for her. So the egg apron is an example. If you find yourself wondering what is the egg apron, because it sounds like the most strange words pushed together possible. Essentially in this video, it's Hannah's birthday and she's opening a package and she looks off camera at someone else and she basically says, I hope it's tickets to Greece. It's her birthday and she's like, oh, okay, it's time to open my present. So she's going through opening the present. And when she mentions several times like, oh, Greece, I hope it's Greece. And when she gets the box open, she discovers that it is an egg apron. So it's a special apron that is designed to be able to hold individual eggs. So he's given her a gift with which to do labor with, rather than tickets to Greece. I think even just his reaction, like he basically is kind of like, you're welcome, to seeing her disappointment, is just one example, I think maybe the loudest example, but certainly just one of many examples of times where people call out that after everything that this woman has done for this man, that when she's like, oh, can I, like, she's given him all these children, she's left her career in ballet, she has this farm, and yet when she like voices, hey, here's a dream I have, it's falling on deaf ears. Another is this post. I saw this while I was scrolling through Reddit. They have a ballerina farm snark page. This is basically what they did for her birthday. It says, back at the ranch, this is the caption, to celebrate Hannah's birthday, we made tuna sandwiches and went up the canyon. And when it comes to celebrating the woman who has popped out 8 of your kids, for the birthday celebration to be tuna sandwiches and going up the canyon, it doesn't feel like he's like pulling out all the stops per se, especially considering, you know, I'm not saying that someone making you a tuna sandwich isn't a nice gesture, but when you're this wealthy, it feels like there are other ways in which you can celebrate the mother of your children. To get back to the blog, another thing I think it reveals is that she does seem to have an inherent love for the land and for raising animals. I don't think it seems like it's just something she hates. They talk about touring other farms, touring land, pulling off to the side of the road to take a look at some cows. I do think she just seems very talented as well. I'm sure she would have done well at any number of different activities or like hobbies or pursuits that they might have had. But it does seem clear that Daniel's dream is the farm. And Hannah gets on board with that dream, but doesn't seem to be the one that's driving the dream. To read from a caption, this is from a post made in 2020. She said, "We haven't always been farmers. I was living in NYC when I met Daniel. He was a city boy, not a rancher. He grew up an hour from Manhattan and spent a lot of his formative years there. Though he knew the ins and outs of the subway system and where to find the best matzo ball soup, his heart wasn't in the city." And now this is the part that I think very telling. "After we married, we spent our first year in NYC, but Daniel was anxious. He didn't want to stay. So we left." And I know that's just a couple of sentences. He was anxious, he didn't want to stay, so we left. But I think it aligns with all of these moments that we're seeing where Daniel has an opinion, Daniel has a desire, he's a little anxious in the big city. The ultimate choice is to go with him, to go with his dream of starting a farm rather than staying in New York. And we know also from the thing where she's talking about Provo, how she doesn't like Provo, she misses New York. It just seems like the core theme of this relationship from the outsiders who are viewing all of these captions and articles is that when he wants something, that's the direction they go. And when she wants something, she figures out a way to fit it into her very limited free time, rather than seeing how both of their dreams are equally honored. Now, like I said, this blog only goes through 2019, but really only through 2017, which is when she stops the bulk of her posting. By November 2017, she has 4 kids. They now are seeming to be on the farm. So at this point, I figured I'd fully address the cosplay criticism commentary and give my hot take about it. I think that the reason people accuse them of cosplay is because, to some extent, it is a fantasy masquerading as a reality, and that their content isn't just a reality, but it's a reality that is within the reach of a lot of people, like almost as if like, oh, this is the life of an average farmer. This is the life of an average homesteader. When once you start digging into the story, there's this JetBlue fortune, there's this idea that they just up and purchased this farm, that this is not like a generational farm. There's this idea of like her wearing beautiful white dresses while carrying milk buckets, when I think a lot of farmers are like, I don't really wear white when doing farm work because it'll get dirty. For me, the family farm element is why it can feel like cosplay. She's making all of this really beautiful food, and behind her is this historic looking oven. And it really, I mean, the oven is like a major element of her videos. It even has a name. They named the oven, I believe the name is Agnes. But when you look into it, the oven is worth between, I saw some numbers at $20,000, some at $35,000. And I think it's safe to say most homesteaders and subsistence farmers don't have a multi-$1,000 stove. And after watching a lot of her content, it does feel like she doesn't often talk about the family fortune that they're set to inherit. For example, this is a Instagram caption from 2018, and she said, after Daniel finished his history degree, we moved to Sao Paulo for him to work in a tech startup for 4 years. Then she goes on. It's not like she's like, the tech startup, which was actually the family business, and he's on the board because he is set to inherit millions of dollars, and that's why that's the tech startup. It feels like there's no connection back to the truth, which is this massive fortune. It's kind of like a half-truth. It feels like a lack of admission. It is probably technically true that he worked at a tech startup, but it doesn't feel like she's being fully forthcoming. Maybe it would feel more representative for her to say, he got a job working for the family business. It's almost like because farming and being a homesteader, she uses the word homesteader a lot, that is very closely equated with like pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. Like literally, to be a homesteader, the definition of that is that you are not reliant on the outside world, that you are getting your food from what you grow, that all of your resources are basically coming from the land and from your own hard work. And so to have this family fortune actually feels like the exact opposite of what's at the heart of homesteading. In this caption, she refers to Ballerina Farm. She's like, we're small business owners. And it can feel like, at what point are you no longer a small business? Like, to me, it feels almost like stolen valor to be like, we're small business owners, we're homesteaders, but also there's this massive amount of wealth, there's partnerships. It feels like using these terms to ingratiate her to her audience, when from those who are looking at the real story behind the scenes, it doesn't really seem like traditional homesteading. It doesn't really feel like a traditional small business. She says in the Times piece that she has lots and lots of employees, but they don't really show those employees on camera. It really makes it look like they're mostly doing it themselves. And when you like pull the teeth, when you're like pulling teeth, you're like, but how much help do you actually have? Then there's like, oh, but there's all these employees. There's the editor for the videos. There's a school teacher who is teaching the children. And none of that is exactly vibing the homesteading that I think most people think of when they hear that word. Even the fact that the farm is likely paid for probably more so by the influencing than by the outputs of the farm versus the other way around. This makes it feel like the farm exists for content, not that the content exists because of the farm. All of these things, I think, are why it can feel like a little bit of smoke and mirrors. And I know that a lot of people know that. And I think that's why some people are like, it's not that deep. Of course, there's like, this is a business, blah, blah, blah. But I think when you are just served one of those videos through your FYP, that isn't the story that feels like it's being shared. And so for me, I think the cosplay allegations are valid. Like I definitely see where they're coming from. Even just the beauty queen dresses while feeding the animals. I think for your everyday farmer, it probably feels a little bit like, that's not really what we're doing over here. I found this comment, which I thought was interesting and pertinent to the conversation. It says, I love what they are doing, but I've grown up around farmers my entire life. They are land rich and money poor. Most of these kids get hand-me-downs, take a bus 30 to 45 minutes to get to school. They don't live lavish, and they can't leave their farm either because they run it and can't afford to leave. He goes on to say, it's an amazing way to live, but it's not their livelihood. She could make more money just posting things on her Instagram, but I admire you want to give your kids this kind of life. It's just not what 99.9% of other farm kids experience. And obviously with all of the Little House on the Prairie comments that she gets, I thought this one was funny. This person on Reddit said, this is what Nellie Olson would wear if she ever had to do farm work. I feel like that probably does speak to this idea that it's basically like wealthy people having a lifestyle farm versus the troubles that would be faced by your average person trying to homestead. I feel like even reading Little House on the Prairie, like I'm not saying I've known a lot of farmers. I obviously, like I said, have lived in relatively agricultural areas. And I think for a lot of these people, they worry a lot about, hey, if it doesn't rain, I won't have crops, I won't have food. Those are like the real concerns of a homesteader versus being like, oh, if it doesn't rain and my crops fail, I'll just go to the supermarket. And so that's why the use of these words can feel a little misdirected, because it's like taking all of the awesome things that come from claiming homesteading, like I'm self-reliant, I grow my own things, I'm organic, blah, blah, blah. It's like taking all of the good that comes from being able to claim that word, but not having to deal with a lot of the stress that comes from having a farm traditionally or homesteading. I also found this comment funny. This is from, I guess, when they first were doing their farming. It says, Daniel is the new kid on the block. Our neighbor cowboys were nice enough to take us on a ride up the canyon on their horses. Didn't take long for them to see that they had a couple of city slickers on their hands. I remember Daniel saying to one of them, you mean you don't like my hat? I saw it at Forever 21 and thought it looked pretty good. And the farmer replies, what the hell is Forever 21? The cowboy replied. So obviously in the beginning, I feel like this is still 2017. This post has, from when I screenshotted it, 444 likes. This still feels like as honest as the blog was, where it's like, we're just talking about, what it's like. It doesn't feel curated. This is somewhat of an embarrassing story, but also kind of funny. And, sounds like these cowboys who were taking them on their horses were probably pretty friendly, but it doesn't feel like, it feels like this is just narrating their experience of having a farm or beginning to be farmers versus what her feed is currently, which doesn't add this level of newbie or novice. Obviously, like I said, this post was from 2017, so they've learned a lot along the way, but it feels like it's at least just telling it like it is, more so than her current feed. Even the fact that they often leave their farm, they recently went to Ireland, I think it said for about 12 weeks, and most homesteaders, like that comment said, they can't afford to leave. They need to take care of the animals. If you leave an animal for 12 weeks, it probably will die. If you have employees, though, who can keep everything running while you're gone, it's pretty straightforward. But we don't really see, when they're in Ireland, we don't really see them taking videos of the farmhands. We don't see them, or really ever. And so there's this level of a lot of people have said, does she have childcare? Does she have a nanny? No. Oh, but I do have a school teacher. Is that not just a nanny who teaches? That's a synonym, I think. To read from this article, it says they have 3 full-time employees on the farm, 30 at the warehouse, more than 10 in the office, and a creative director who manages the website visuals. That's a lot of employees. That's a pretty big business for some simple homesteaders. I don't know if she's beating the cosplay allegations anytime soon. I do think one element that makes it probably feel more authentic to her is, like I mentioned earlier, that Mormons have this very long-standing history of honoring the Mormon pioneers. Utah has Pioneer Day. She grew up with that. So she grew up in Utah. So she grew up every year, and during Pioneer Day, the girls wear bonnets. There's also Trek, which I didn't participate in because we were moving, but all the youth dress up like young pioneers and they push hand carts. And so to her, probably to some extent, the reason this feels like second nature is because Mormon kids grow up with this narrative around how amazing the pioneers were, and they grow up celebrating Pioneer Day and talking about Brigham Young heading west, and wow, all of our pioneer ancestors were so brave and they did anything for faith. So to some extent, her Little House on the Prairie vibes do probably come from her ancestry and from growing up hearing stories about how amazing the Mormon pioneers were. Even just the structure of her early Instagram really reveals a lot about the way the family's priorities are being laid out. I'll put a screenshot off to the side here, but you can just immediately see, just by glancing at the page, where the priorities are. Because for every one post there is about dance, there's 9 posts about farm life. And it makes it so clear, like, just even when you take a quick glimpse, how her dreams have become minimized to me time or mommy's little hobby, rather than being the entire goal of the family to support this one particular dream. Here's a quote from the Times piece that speaks to this. It says, "Daniel wanted to live in the great western wilds, so they did. He wanted to farm, so they do. He likes date nights once a week, so they go. They have a babysitter on those evenings. He didn't want nannies in the house, so there aren't any. The only space earmarked to be Neilman's own, Hannah's own. A small barn she wanted to convert into a ballet studio ended up becoming the kids' schoolroom." And as I'm listening to all of this explanation about Hannah and how people feel that she's trapped, if I had to name what trapped her, I would say honestly that it's her Mormon ideology. It is the doctrine of what women are that's trapped her. And Daniel is just the chess piece that happened to fit into place when the game board got set up. If it wasn't, like, for me, it's not that Daniel is some sort of like exceptionally strange and cruel and odd monster. It's not that Daniel is like so much more controlling than any other man. It's that he is just an archetypal Mormon man. He's acting out the role of being a man that he's been taught to act out, that he gets to decide. He has dominion over the family. He is the patriarch. He is the leader. And the reason that Hannah's life has played out in this way isn't because of Daniel per se. He's just a game piece, just like she is also just a game piece in the doctrine of Mormonism. It's like that quote that I used to have told to me all the time, which is that any righteous woman and any righteous Mormon man can get together, can get married, and they can make it work if they are both willing to pay the price. He also said soulmates are a fiction and an illusion in that same speech. And truly, Mormonism is just a conveyor belt. And what's singular about Hannah and Daniel is not the way their relationship has gone, because it's honestly quite common for a Mormon relationship. The only thing that's different about them is just that they're famous. But what we see happen with the two of them, with her being submissive and him being domineering, has happened in Mormon couples and in religious couples for decades. There's nothing that unique there. And I think it's also why, people are like, she looks happy. She has all these kids, she has this beautiful house, she has this land. Obviously, there are worse fates. But when it comes to women, I feel like I'm just tired of the narrative being like, well, there are worse ways women have been. It's like we are equating ourselves down to the lowest common denominator rather than asking ourselves what should be the ideal. And I think my frustration surrounding this idea that feminism is women supporting women is that simply women aren't always making the best decisions for themselves, for their daughters, for their communities, for womankind. I've flashed this tweet up many times, which is, no, I do not support all women. Some of you bitches are very dumb. I don't think that women should be put on a pedestal. I think that ultimately criticizing and discussing and having active debates about what is the state of women in this country is really vital to ensuring that we don't continue to fall and slide backwards when it comes to women's rights. And while I do think it's generally positive to support women in their choices most of the time, it's also the case that women have been heavily indoctrinated to view themselves in a very particular way. When I think of how I thought of myself back when I was a Mormon woman, I fully accepted the fact that a man should have dominion over me. And that's not because I was a feminist. That was because that was what I was taught as the only right way to view myself, as the only righteous way to view myself. In the case of Hannah, she's been heavily indoctrinated to make very specific life choices, to believe that her number one role in this world should be wife and mother. And so I think it's rather wrongheaded to look at that level of pressure and indoctrination and to be able to just wash our hands of it and say, well, that's a woman's choice and we should support her regardless of what she's doing. I think instead it's very worthwhile to say, hey, there are obviously pressures that women face. There's ways we're taught to be from very young ages. And to act on that doesn't necessarily mean it comes from a place of total autonomy. We are not born in a vacuum. We are born with tremendous pressures placed on us to be certain ways and to become certain things. And so, yes, those types of pressures definitely deserve some scrutiny. And to act on those pressures, it doesn't mean you're acting purely out of, in a vacuum of best choices. Obviously, Utah has the youngest marriage rate by many, many years. And also, Utah is the hometown of Mormonism. And so when we see these forces colliding, do we tell ourselves oh, I guess there's just something different in the water out there in Utah. I guess people just really like getting married in Utah. It's a vacuum. There's literally no reason why this statistic exists. No, that's very illogical to me. Obviously, social pressures push people to make very specific life decisions. And to call those decisions feminist or just to say carte blanche, you get my full support, even though you've faced massive amounts of pressure to make that one very particular life decision, I'm just not buying it. I think where this gets tricky though is that for these individuals, if you go and say, hey, I think you're trapped or I think you're indoctrinated, of course they're going to say, no, I'm not. I'm living just exactly how I want to be living. And ultimately, that's why I think for me, my biggest focus in making my videos is always centered around education and saying, here's information. I'm an ex-Mormon. Here's information I wish I had. And sure, a lot of people see that information and they say, well, I don't care. I don't want to hear that. But there's also a lot of people who have their minds changed, who have their lives changed. I've had people say they chose not to go on a mission because of some of the information I've shared in these videos. And so to me, that shows that lack of access to information is the number one reason people don't feel empowered to make decisions about their own life. I obviously don't think Hannah believes that she is trapped. I also don't think most devout Mormon women would say that they are trapped. But I also think that oftentimes you can't see the forest for the trees. It honestly reminds me of Plato's allegory of the cave, which if you've never read, I highly recommend, especially for anyone who's leaving a religion. And to me, what it means is essentially that the world is not what you think it is when you're born and raised in a cave. And you might think you understand reality and the way the world operates, but it isn't till you leave that cave that you have a transcendent moment of really understanding reality. Another comparison that I thought about a lot when I first left the church was if you've ever seen videos of people putting on those glasses that allow you to see color if you're colorblind. Why I think that's so interesting, or even babies who have bad vision and they put the glasses on and then they can see their parents and the baby is just those videos make me so emotional. And I think it's because that is how I felt when I left the Mormon church. I feel like I I definitely thought I was living in a normal reality. When you're born and raised in something, you're just a fish in water. You don't know any different. And for me, when I left the church, it was like putting those glasses on. It was like exiting the cave, because suddenly the air I'm breathing is the same. My two hands on my arms are the same. My eyes are the same. Like, everything about me and everything about my reality is the same, but my perception of it has shifted so fundamentally that it actually feels like I am living in a completely different world. And I've been thinking about Ballerina Farm as I made this outline, and then also as I did my video about outdoor boys. And he has this video where he says, you know, doing YouTube videos is cool, but like, nothing is more important to me than faith and family. I think Hannah Nealman is the other side of the coin. So in the video with Outdoor Boys, Luke Nichols, his wife doesn't almost ever talk in that whole video. And to me, Hannah and Luke Nichols' wife are two sides of the same coin. They are to me, the dark side of faith and family, where the man gets to have the career, he gets to have the wife, he gets to have the kids, he gets access to the money, he gets the education, he gets the higher degrees, he gets the leadership positions. He can claim faith and family, and he gets everything. Whereas the women become supporting characters in their own life. And it makes me really wonder what it is like to be Hannah Nealman, because I feel like seeing so much of this person in her early days, like going and reading the blog. I read so much of the blog, reading her early Instagram posts, and then comparing that to who she is now, which is basically just a brand. It does make me wonder, like, what's going on under the surface of this person. And I don't think we'll ever really get, quote, the real Hannah, but we'll get less and less of her, I think, as time goes on and as she disappears into this void of being a seller of protein powder rather than what she used to be, which was just like having a journal online. Around the time of that post where she was talking about how Daniel got anxious and he wanted to leave, so they did, that is basically when her account really started to take off. There was, if you recall, during the pandemic, there were all these conversations about sourdough, and everybody was in their sourdough era, and everybody was coming up with activities to do at home because we were all shut down and locked in, and it just meant that there was more time to spend on the internet, obviously, more time to do homemaking style activities, and this is definitely where her account fully started to take off. They started selling a lot of their merch around 2022. This is where we started to get protein powder, breads, pastries, meats, cutting boards that they were selling as products, basically marketing toward, like, you can be like Ballerina Farm too, here are all the products I'm using day to day. And her account became a lot more focused on selling items, selling merch, selling objects, rather than just sharing her life. Hannah was in the New York Times in 2024 for her participation in the beauty pageant. This was the first time I really started seeing everybody talk about her, and I swear that all of the conversation in the Ballerina Farm discourse has not calmed down since that article. The first line of this New York Times article simply says, "I'm still bleeding a little," Hannah Nealman said, because she participated in this beauty pageant 2 weeks after giving birth. And honestly, as someone who I have 2 kids, I've given birth twice. As someone who has experienced being postpartum, I can see why it made people like a little upset and why it's frustrating to see influencers say something like, "I'm just sharing my life," when they are ultimately influencers. And even Nara Smith, when she posted her postpartum body after giving birth, it's obviously like their defense is like, "I'm just sharing my life." But for women who are following them, which is in the millions, it can feel like there becomes a tremendous amount of pressure to fit in that way, to do the things they're doing, to perform femininity in these ways, to be superwoman while also having babies, while also making all the meals. And I think it feels a little thin to have an influencer say something like, "Well, I'm just sharing my life," when ultimately they are influencers. They are influencing culture, and they are sharing a story that a lot of people are impacted by. And honestly, there are just already so many pressures on new moms that that to make these types of stories go viral and to be on the front covers of magazines and newspapers does feel like it's sending a very particular message to women about the ways they should be. This brings us more or less up to where she is today. She currently has 23 million followers across her platforms. I do feel like she's in a never-ending hamster wheel of controversy, and I feel like if someone just dedicated an entire YouTube channel to just like talking about all of the controversy she's always in, like, I'm sure that there would be an appetite for it. I do not have an appetite myself to make that much content about her, but I feel like every day I'm seeing, whether it's the raw milk scandal she was just involved in, where they had to the raw milk they sell failed the health codes, so they had to take it off the shelves. There was the egg apron that Daniel gave her that she wanted tickets to Greece. There was the Queen of the Tradwives article. I've seen people go to the farm stand that they opened recently, and they've posted pictures of flies being in, the areas where the food is being made or the food is being displayed, and it's like no matter what on any given day, I swear if you go to her account, there's somebody who's mad at her for something. Along with the never-ending list of controversies, there seems to be a never-ending list of new products to buy from her. As I said at the beginning, they now have 8 kids. Reddit thinks she's pregnant again right now, so pregnant with their 9th. Who knows? It's not confirmed. I do think it's interesting how much she's moved Mormonism off the table when it comes to her content. That was another thing highlighted by the Times article, which is that in the in-person interview and in the material, like they said that the kids have a homeschooling curriculum that's Mormon adjacent. And I think that it is interesting because so many people accuse her of selling Mormonism or pushing Mormonism, when in reality, I actually think when you compare her current amount of talking about the Mormon church to how much she talked about it when it was more like her private journal, the difference is very stark. She recently went to a temple wedding, but she didn't prominently photograph the temple, for example. There's no caption that says something like families can be together forever. She's not being really overt with it. It's just like, oh, I went to a wedding, but there's no explanation of what a temple ceiling is or why the temple is so important. And I do think you'd see that from other Mormon influencers. Even Lucky Blue Smith has had posts where he's shared the Book of Mormon and encouraged people to read it, which is a very common Mormon type of post, to be like, I love the Book of Mormon. But we don't see her using her platform for that, and she definitely could if she wanted to. I've actually talked to a lot of reporters over the last couple years of making content, and I feel like Hannah inevitably comes up because that's, for a lot of them, their access point to this world of Mormon influencers. And they always ask me, like, what message do you think she's pushing to the world? But I think that Hannah's content is a mirror more than it is a message. I think if she really wanted to be pushing Mormonism, for example, there'd be a lot of clear ways for her to do it. Sharing the Book of Mormon, talking about the church all the time, inviting people to go to find their local congregation. She's not engaging in any of that. Even when it comes to politics, I know Candace Owens has talked about her, Britt Cooper has talked about her. A lot of people on the right have, especially after that Queen of the Tradwives article, a lot of people were talking about her. And I think that if she was really excited about that, like if she was really excited that Candace Owens was talking about her, we would see her liking it, resharing it, retweeting it, maybe going on for an interview. But Hannah, it's like mum's the word. She doesn't really engage, at least very obviously engage, with any of these far right-leaning individuals online. And maybe this is just how propaganda works. It's supposed to be a little bit of more of like a soft influence that lulls you into a sense of security till it convinces you to have 8 children. But I think that we've seen many public figures who have a message share that message really loudly, share that message without holding back at all. And I think that the fact that Hannah doesn't say something like, this is why you should be a tradwife, this is why you should join the Mormon church, this is why you should vote for Trump, for example, I think the fact she doesn't say that is revealing to me that it is ultimately just a brand, and that people's interest in her social media says more about the audience than it does about her specifically. And so for me, when it comes to talking about the rise of tradwife content, whether they call themselves that or they're labeled that, I'm not so specifically concerned about Hannah herself necessarily, primarily because she's not using her platform to very rigidly and clearly push a specific ideology. What's more concerning to me is the size of the audience and the clear desire to return to this simpler time that her content is associated with, a simpler time where women had fewer rights. I think for me, my concern about tradwife content is not any of the individual women who are performing this type of content online or creating this type of content online, but rather what this reveals about the broader cultural movement we are currently finding ourselves in. When I consume her content, I feel like I find myself thinking like all that glitters is not gold. Just because it's shiny does not mean what's lurking underneath is desirable. And I think that honestly, there's just no such thing as a free lunch. And while Hannah obviously does say in interviews that she is happy, I think that as I've shown in this video, there are touch points throughout what she's put online that show that she feels a lot more conflicted about the choices she's made than she reveals at this point to the internet. As I researched her, I also was thinking about this song that I grew up listening to a lot of country. And there's a song called How Do You Like Me Now? And one of the lines from that song is, "You married in the money, girl, ain't it a cruel and funny world? They took your dreams and they tore them apart." And that song kind of reminds me of Hannah Nealman. You know, I think her cage is gilded, but it's still a cage. You can trade your freedom and your dreams for security, for righteousness, for money, but all of those things are going to end up restricting you in the long term. If you've made it to the end of this video, I truly applaud you. I know that this was a longer video than usual. It seems like anybody who ends up talking about Ballerina Farm and Hannah Nealman ends up having a lot to say, which is probably why she's been in every single newspaper you could name, because I think people are endlessly curious about her. I definitely recommend checking out that early blog if you're curious to read through it yourself. I found that to be one of the most enlightening aspects of doing this research today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking this video, subscribing to my channel, check out my Patreon video. I reacted to the new Netflix documentary about Elizabeth Smart, and then also shared some of my own experiences when I was a young Mormon girl, hearing about her get kidnapped, and basically like what my experience was like, hearing all of these stories and hearing what people were saying about it. And then also just, I kind of listed and explained more of the Mormon connections, because as I watched the Netflix documentary, I feel like they do talk about it, but I feel like there's so much more to get into that just kind of gets glazed over. So if you want to check out my Mormon/ex-Mormon analysis of the Elizabeth Smart story, it's already posted. You can check it out over on Patreon. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed this very deep dive into Hannah Nealman, aka Ballerina Farms. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you all next week.